And so we continue to be excited about having ACU on our campus, Cyber Institute for ACU on our campus from yesterday and today. And you're going to get to hear from several Bible professors, actually peers, Mason and I, who you're going to hear from this morning. We're in school together. He got better grades than I did, which is why he's going to be, he's teaching at ACU. But I'm really excited for him to be sharing with you this morning. He is going to continue a conversation we started yesterday. For those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday morning, we had several conversations from several presenters around faith formation in a digital age. One of the most distracting things, one of the most significant factors in our spiritual lives these days is our interaction with technology. And that's something we need to think through. How do we do that well as Christians? And so we're going to continue that conversation today. My friend Mason Lee is going to continue that conversation for us. But before he comes up, I'm going to ask you. Yes.
Right, probably.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay, but can you also tell them that cards back over here? You don't know that move.
Yeah, I don't know who they're for. I know
they're with Mary.
Carol, who are they for? Who are the cards for?
One is for Claudia's children, one of our Bible class teachers, she's the hospital issue that they're resolved. So that's family needs to be encouraged. That's a part of for carrying the food.
Okay.
You know, she's leukemia that's after his wife. So this family needs to be encouraged as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. So if you haven't had a chance, Carolyn has two cards back here for us to sign. One for Joe Reddick. Many of you know him through our Bible classes, Thompson classes. This is Kalai McCann's father. He's been in the hospital recently. They're doing a lot of tests trying to figure out what's going on with him. I know they just transferred him down to the Desiree to do some further testing. And so one of those cards is for him, and then the other one is for Candy Poole. Of course, recently was diagnosed with leukemia, and she's there at MD Anderson. So please, before you leave today, if you haven't had a chance yet, sign those cards to encourage both of them.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. All right, let's say a prayer and then we'll jump into our conversation. Well, Father, as we gather before you, we first want to remember the names you just mentioned. We pray that you be with our brother Joe. We pray that you would continue to enlighten the doctors who are serving him. The tests that they are running will be productive and narrow down exactly what is going on so that they can work together. And we pray also for Candy. We are thankful that we saw that she had such a good day yesterday, able to get outside for the first time in weeks, to see nature, to feel air, all those things that so many of us take for granted. Father, we thank you for that mercy yesterday for her. And we continue to pray for her strength and for her healing as she recovers. We're thankful for the care she's receiving at every age. Father, be with us as we listen. May we attend well to you and to one another this morning. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, please welcome Mason.
Well, good morning, everyone. David and I were classmates together. My grades may have been better, but what David doesn't know about that is really all that means is I knew who to sit by to look over their shoulder in the classes. David was less good at that, and I think that's maybe the divergence in our careers. I want to talk this morning, again, David mentioned this, we're picking up a conversation that we began yesterday with some folks. If you were here, you might recognize some of the things that get mentioned. But thinking about this thing called a digital age that we live in. And I want to talk this morning specifically for the next 2.5, 3 hours. There's like some people are laughing, others are a little more nervous about that. So it will not be that long. The next 45 minutes or so. I want us to think about what does it mean to form faith in the world that we find ourselves in. What does it mean to form faith in the world that we find ourselves in? We can use the unique language of a digital age to define the world that we live in, and I think there's some truth to that. But I think we're asking questions that Christians for a long time have been asking, right? About how do you form disciples of Jesus Christ in the world that you find yourself living in? And like every age, a digital age has some unique challenges to faith formation, to developing that faith. And so I want to talk this morning some about what actually is Christian faith. When we use that term, what are we actually talking about? And then thinking about some of the ways in which the world we find ourselves, this digital age, poses some unique challenges for faith formation that we maybe didn't have to think about 30 years ago. But the world is such now that we actually we're being challenged and pressed in some unique ways. But I also want us to spend some time, because I also believe this is true, thinking about the opportunities for faith development that exist now that did not exist 30, 35 years ago. So I want to do a little bit of that. Does that sound okay for the next 45 minutes or so? I also will tell you, and my students will tell you this, I hope my students will tell you this, I'm not a great lecturer, so I don't do that very often, so I do a lot of discussion. So I'm going to ask you at points to turn to your tables and talk about some questions I'm going to give you. I trust you'll do that. I've heard this is a talkative group, but I also see donuts and coffee, so you're caffeinated and you're sugared. So you ought to be able to have a conversation at your tables. So thanks to the folks at BAML for supplying all the stimulants to facilitate morning conversations. Let me start this way. I think you know the world has changed when your language changes. You know you're living in a different world when your language changes, when the language you use to describe that world changes. Stanley Hauerwas, one of my favorite Christian thinkers, theologians, right, professors to read, he once said, you can only live in the world you can see, and you can only see the world you can say. That the way we choose to describe things, the language we use, actually shapes how we understand the world we're living in. And we know this is true, right? We know this in a lot of ways. We know this, for example, that we didn't used to always use economic language to talk about non-economic aspects of our world, right? We didn't talk about human capital or resources, to talk about non-monetary things and resources, or use expressions like time is money, or return on investment for things that didn't actually have to do with money, right? There was a period of time when we didn't use kind of money metaphors and language to describe non-money aspects of our world, but now we do, right? That's how you know the world's changed, when your language to describe the world is different. I want to suggest this language that this world we find ourselves in now, that yesterday morning, and you'll hear me someday talk about a digital age, is another kind of phenomenon like that, where we know we're in a different world because the language we're using is different. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a conference and I was talking to someone from another school, and we were talking about some similar projects we were doing, and I'll never forget, the conversation ended, he handed me his card and said, yeah, let's interface more about this. And I have to confess, I didn't have great self-control. I probably looked at him like he had a third eye on his forehead. I had no idea what he was talking. What does he mean? And so later I was talking to a friend, and I said, he said interface with him. What does that mean? He wants to talk with you more about it. It's like, well, why didn't he just say, let's talk about it, right? Or we don't talk about relationships anymore. We talk about networks, right? Or we design our ways of teaching and our ways of thinking in schools about knowledge transfer and as like data information downloading and these kinds of things, right? You know you're living in a different world when the language you use has changed. And I want to propose that I think we're seeing that happen in real time. It's been going on for a while. And the language we're using now is this kind of digital technological language, which, as Dr. Hamilton said yesterday morning, is not neutral language, right? So I want to talk a little bit about this world we're living in. I want to define it for a second, and then I actually want to spend some time talking about Christian faith and some dimensions of Christian faith, because I don't think Christian faith is one thing. And then think about what are the unique opportunities and challenges of developing Christian faith in this world. Okay, we okay? So let me do this. Let me define what I mean when I use this language of a digital age. I'm jumping how do I go back? There we go. You've got to be a really good shot with the clicker from this far. So here's some things, and I'll be interested. I want to give you some time at your tables to think about how you're experiencing these realities yourself. When I use the language of we're living in a digital age, the world that you and I find ourselves in right now, I think there are some defining features of that world. One of those defining features is I call mobility. The expectation that you are always present, that you are always available. I don't know if you have this phenomena or not. I have had to, for myself and for the health of my family, construct pretty tight boundaries around when I will or won't answer emails about things. Because I have this wonderful device that I can be anywhere in the world and I can get phone calls, although not as many phone calls anymore, and text messages and emails, right? Wherever I go, I'm available. And there's some wonderful things about that, right? I can be here in Houston, my wife, Kelsey, can be back in Abilene, and we can have a phone call or a FaceTime, right? And check in. I can call folks and let them know I got places okay. I'm available in that way, that I know if there's ever an emergency in my family, I'm available. And that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't just end there, right? The expectation of availability sort of extends to every other dimension of our lives, right? My wife, Kelsey's a first grade teacher, and she had this conversation with one of her co-teachers because the teacher was emailing everyone on the weekend. And Kelsey said, yeah, your second family is Alcorta. That's the school they teach at. And so she talked about this teacher's second family because the teacher spends all weekend sort of emailing, communicating, right? So part of the world we find ourselves in is this mobility, that we have technology, we have devices now that allow us to kind of always be present to one another, which oftentimes comes with the expectation that you are present and that you are available, and that if someone tries to contact you, you do respond and you do engage. Which then leads to this next idea of connectivity, right? We talk about this a lot of times in terms of social media. But the idea that so much of our lives is now kind of mediated and occurs through these like places where we all meet digitally. So X or Facebook or Instagram or whatever they are, right? We have these kind of social hubs that are kind of the sort of intersection of how we relate to one another. We don't encounter people as much in the grocery store anymore as we do in social media spaces. I have a lot of friends, it's really interesting before this, I have a lot of friends I've never actually met in person, but I'm friends with on social media. And they comment wonderfully encouraging things on posts that I put up. I do a Friday morning donut log with my kids, and I get wonderful comments about that. But there's a lot of people who are commenting that I've never actually met them in person. And that's an interesting phenomenon, right? To have these sort of digital hubs now be the primary way that we connect with one another, right? So there's this connectivity. And the last piece I'll talk about, kind of related to this, is this idea of novelty. That have you ever felt like things are like just moving faster and faster and faster and faster? like the speed at which new technology is being produced, the expectations for how quickly we do things, it's just kind of getting faster and faster and faster. And so this idea of novelty or the emphasis on now, that we've got to generate stuff now, not a year from now. We've got to do things at a much faster rate and at a much faster speed. And so I think these are three sort of components of the world we find ourselves living in that are pretty important to understand to kind of give descriptive power to what we're experiencing. So at your tables, I want you to take 30 seconds to a minute, maybe 90 seconds, maybe we'll give you that much. And I want you to, where do you see these three things working in your own life? This mobility, connectivity, novelty. How are you experiencing those three things in your own life? Take 90 seconds at your table and mention some of the ways you're experiencing those now. Okay, about 15 more seconds. Okay. This is always the hard part, is bringing people back in. So I'm assuming everyone had an illustration, right? Everybody at the table had a story, something they could share, right, about how they're kind of experiencing these three things. This is what I mean by this is the world we find ourselves in, and there's nobody that's immune from it, right? Which is kind of comforting, because in some way it means we're all struggling with the same stuff, right? Nobody's an outlier, right? We all have the same concerns. We're all trying to wrestle with the same questions, which means then it's something we can talk about, which is actually a really encouraging thing, right? So here's what I want to do. I think the worst thing, I realize I'm being recorded here, so I kind of want to hedge this with 1,000 qualifications, but I think the worst thing we could do, thinking about the world in which we find ourselves, is to say, this is awful and we need to go away, and we need to find a way to undo it, right? One, I'm a practical theologian by training. That doesn't sound workable to me. I don't know how we do that. But I also don't think it's helpful for Christian witness. And I also don't think it's reflective of the way in which God can work in the world. So to me, the question, I think that's maybe, I don't want us to do that, but I do want us to think about the ways in which the world we find ourselves in is pressing us and posing unique challenges to the way we think about how we form faith in ourselves, in our kids, in our youth groups, in our congregations, and to think about those challenges intentionally, but also to think about the ways in which there might be unique opportunity to do that very kind of work, right? If we're open to kind of thinking about it maybe a little bit differently. So I want to talk for a little bit of time just about what actually is Christian faith. We use that term a lot, and I think oftentimes we use a term like faith, and we just assume we all are kind of meaning the same thing, and then we talk about it and realize, oh no, we're actually talking about very, very different things. And so this is me just kind of telling you how I think about Christian faith, and because I'm the one with the clicker, that gets to be the definition that we use for the rest of the morning. So Christian faith, I think, fundamentally, you see it up there on the screen, that Christian faith at a most basic level is a relationship of trust in the God whose love and faithfulness has been shown in Jesus Christ. That when we talk about Christian faith, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a relationship of trust in which I grow in increasing intimacy with God. And I see that love and faithfulness of God most revealed in Jesus Christ. But the thing is, and you see it up there on the screen, is that Christian faith doesn't have just one part. It's actually got dimensions to it or sides. It's a 3D shape, right? It's not flat. And I want to name, I think there are 4 dimensions that I really want to press on this morning for how we think about Christian faith, because I think this has impact for what does it mean to form Christian faith. That if Christian faith has these dimensions to it, then actually holistic faith formation has to address all of the dimensions, right? That sort of makes sense. And so I think Christian faith has these kind of 4 dimensions to it. 1, Christian faith has a belief dimension about God that serve as the basis for our trust in God. And we'll talk more about each of these in a second. Christian faith has a relationship dimension in which I have a relationship with God that brings me into closer relationship with the people of God. We call that the church, right? My relationship with God draws me deeper into life with God, but also life with others. Christian faith has a mystery dimension to it that recognizes the limits of our ability to know completely or to control God. And then Christian faith also has a commitment dimension in which we commit ourselves and our lives to behave and to act as though God was trustworthy and to let that sort of issue forth in concrete actions in the way we live our lives. So I want to talk about each of these for like 2 or 3 minutes each and kind of talk about how I think a digital age might be challenging us, but also thinking about ways it might be giving us great opportunity. Okay, so faith as belief. This is the one we all know. This is the one I grew up with, right? Which is that there is a dimension of Christian faith that is fundamentally about knowledge and beliefs about God. And these beliefs shape how we understand God and how we relate to God and also how we understand ourselves in the world. And that makes sense, right? That there is a belief dimension to Christian faith. If Christian faith is about a relationship, then it certainly needs to include beliefs and knowledge about the one to whom I relate, right? It would be really strange, you would probably all worry for me, if I said, I love my wife. Oh, what's her name? You know, I haven't gotten to that. Well, what's her favorite food? Couldn't tell you. Well, where did she grow up? That's really, I never thought, I don't know. What's her favorite color? Does she have any allergies? I don't know. She just is lovely, right? Like, you would start to question my relationship, right? The statement, I love my wife, but I actually don't know anything about her. That would be a weird thing that'd be a weird space to exist in, right? Well, I think in some ways it's the same way at a larger level with our relationship with God. That Christian faith does have at its basis beliefs about God, about God's character, about what we believe God desires for us and for the world, about what it means to live a life in faithfulness to God. And that those beliefs serve as the basis for how we understand and relate to God. And it also, and this is the tricky part, influences how we understand ourselves. Because our beliefs about God and our beliefs about ourselves always go hand in hand. This is one of the things I tell my students in the preaching class, is that it's actually really hard to give feedback on sermons And it's hard to receive feedback on sermons because when you're receiving feedback on sermons, you're not just talking about God, you're actually talking about the preacher's sense of themselves and who they are, right? That they sort of operate out of these beliefs of who God is, and that shapes how they understand themselves. And so to raise questions about a person's belief in God is to also sort of call that person into question in some ways that are tender conversations. But Christian faith does have this belief component. And so it's interesting to think about the ways in which the world we find ourselves poses some unique challenges to that, right? So if part of what it means to form Christian faith is to give a sort of basis of belief in God that can serve as a relationship of trust, then it becomes a real question about how a digital age is challenging that. I'm curious, take 30 seconds at your table, thinking about the world we find ourselves in. How does it maybe challenge the belief dimension of Christian faith, right? That if there is this way in which Christian faith does have a set of beliefs that serve as the basis for trust in God, how is the world we're living in complicating or challenging that? Take 30 seconds at your table.
That may be an obstacle.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges? If Christian faith, if one dimension of Christian faith is a belief dimension that includes knowledge and beliefs that serve as the basis of trust in God, what are some of the ways in which the world we find ourselves in, this digital age, is complicating that or challenging that? The handing on of beliefs and knowledge about God that can actually serve as the foundation for trust. Or I'm curious what some of you said at your table. Just shout it out.
I think we can forget that there are things in this life that are bigger than us.
Yeah.
We're going to need someone
Yeah.
to meet the need. But with all the information that we have,
Yeah.
it's an illusion. But we buy into, well, I'm pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And then something happens, and you have no idea what the outcome is going to end up being unless you know God.
Yeah. Yeah, your comment about the information, we talked about this yesterday morning, where one of the unique challenges is there's just so much information. And depending on how you define information, right, there's just so much, there's so much available that it in some ways becomes hard to know. How do you evaluate? How do you assess what's a healthy belief or what's an unhealthy belief? Right? What's healthy belief in God and what's unhealthy belief in God? What beliefs in God are gonna form me in flourishing ways that open me up to God and to others in the world? And what are the beliefs that could actually kind of be more destructive? I think we see those around. Yeah.
I think part of what's hard too is we live in a fast information society where you're only getting small snippets of everything.
Yeah.
And God's character is so complex, and so many different parts fit together to create the image of who He is as a whole. You can take all different sorts of stories or aspects from the Bible, and as a singular glimpse, you can expand that and think that that's His whole character.
Yeah.
But if it's not in context, like most things, it
Yeah.
can be misconstrued and misapplied. And so I think, especially social media, you get, people will share one little glimpse, and others will see that, especially non-believers, and think, I don't want that God.
Yeah.
That's such a small portion, like all things in society, such a
Yeah.
small portion. It has to be read in context.
Yeah.
So it's a disservice to take so many little snippets out of context.
Yeah. To me, this is a huge challenge, is when there's just so much, how do you help people navigate just the volume, right? Just the volume is overwhelming. And how do you do that? And how do you form, how do you develop and form Christian belief in a context when I can jump on any of these kind of hubs, right? Back to our connectivity and hear so many different kinds of things, right? But it's not all bad. This is the challenge, right? It's not all just bad, because I was thinking about this. It also has probably at the same time never been easier for a church to say, this is what we believe, and to develop like statements and distribute that information, right, about what I would call healthy Christian teaching, right? That's also never been easier, and you can have reach that's incredible. I remember one time I was guest preaching at a church, and they had the ability to kind of see where people were clicking in on the online. They were still doing their online stuff, and they had the ability to see like where people were joining the live stream worship service from. And I was talking with the technology guy after, and there was like 20 states who were coming. The communion talk was really great. I don't know about the sermon that particular Sunday morning, but 20 states were coming in. Now, I know there's also questions with that about why weren't they at a church where they live. I get that. But it's sort of interesting to then think about the potential reach of a church and how a church can intentionally and with purpose provide healthy Christian teaching and beliefs about God to a wider audience than has really ever been available before, right? So it's sort of interesting to think, which then raises the question here that I want you to sort of leave you thinking about. It raises the question, how are we then handing on, explaining, and discussing a body of knowledge that can serve as the foundation for trust in God? In what ways are we doing that intentionally? Are we helping people navigate this dimension of faith formation? Now, the danger would be to say, yeah, that's all Christian faith is it's just you come to right belief in God. And Churches of Christ, the tradition to which I belong, right, that's kind of been the main way we operated, right? That predominantly what Christian faith is about is understanding the right things about God, and then once you have that, everything else kind of follows in line. I don't think that's quite accurate. I don't know if I can say that if I'm being recorded and videoed. I don't think that's the whole picture. That's certainly part of it, right? In the same way that it would be weird for me to say I have a loving relationship with my wife but don't know anything about her. It would be weird to say I have a deep relationship with God but don't know anything about God. That would be weird to say. There also seems to be more to it than that, which then brings me to what I would call, am I getting it?
You got it. You had it.
I had it. There we go. Okay. So faith has a belief dimension, which focuses on the beliefs that serve as the foundation for a relationship of trust. Faith also has a relationship dimension, which involves, at a fundamental level, opening ourselves to the life and work of God. This relationship with God sort of leads to a relationship with others. It would be a weird thing to say, I love my wife and I have a loving relationship with her, but we actually don't interact at all. I don't say I love you, we don't communicate, we don't plan our schedules together. if I were to make major life decisions without involving her, it would be really, really weird to say I had a loving relationship with my wife, right? Well, in the same way writ large around Christian faith, right? It would be a weird thing to say I have a robust Christian faith if I am not interacting in some personal way with God. That I do think there's a relationship dimension of Christian faith in which I am actively pursuing deeper familiarity and intimacy with God. And that this relationship, as it deepens, also leads me into deeper relationship with others, right? That it's not just me going on an island by myself, but that my relationship with God draws me into deeper relationship with the community of God that we call the church, right? And so there is a relationship dimension in which I am fostering, what I say there, fostering a sense of God's active presence in my life and in the world. Sometimes we call this spirituality, right, or spiritual formation. Which is also an interesting component to think about in the digital age in which we find ourselves. Because it seems like one of the challenges, I don't know what you think about this, it seems like one of the challenges to me, so relationships at a fundamental level, relationships involve me opening myself to another, right? I have to talk with my wife, I have to talk with my friends, I have to take them into account, that there's a way in which I have to make myself vulnerable to somebody else to actually have a relationship with that person, right? That seems obvious. And yet I can't help but wonder if the social hubs that mediate our life today, if they actually sort of try to steer us against that vulnerability, to lead you to think that you can actually have relationships, but you can have them entirely on your terms. And you can have, people can only see the parts of you that you want them to see. They can only share in the experiences that you want them to share in. And it sort of creates the idea that all of the other people who exist around me sort of exist, well, for me, right? And for me and for what I want out of whatever the given relationship is. And so it seems like there's a unique challenge around the relationship dimension of Christian faith, because so much of the way our world is organized now is designed to sort of think we can have relationship minus vulnerability and relationships minus the kind of mutual nature and quality of those relationships. But it's not just all bad. So I want you to take 30 seconds at your table, and I want you, I went backwards. There we go. I think there are also some ways in which the world we find ourselves in can actually help us foster relationships in ways that weren't possible before. So I'm interested at your tables how you're seeing that. How are you seeing relationships being fostered kind of in your world where you're living now? Take 30 seconds and do that. Okay. Okay. So Christian faith has a relationship dimension that draws me into deeper intimacy with God, and through that intimacy with God, into deeper relationship with the people of God. I'm curious, what ways are you seeing that relationship dimension or forming relationships? I'm curious what you talked about at your table. Just one or two people. What were some of the things you named at your tables? Yeah.
Dr. Hamilton had some very interesting things to say about online dating.
Okay.
No, actually, I had said, this is not true, it's not true at all. I said something about, like, it seems like digital relationship, like they can supplement other, like, physical relationships, like people you see face to face.
Yeah.
But Dr. Hamilton pointed out that you can start digitally, and then it may be deeper into a personal relationship.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the relationships of this purely stay digital. That seems like that has some challenges.
Yeah. But there is a lower threshold of entry, which for some people can be really, really helpful, right? We don't want it to stay there. You wouldn't want it to stay there, but it may be a great place for folks to start, maybe, right? Yeah. Lee.
So I have found with my teenager that just got home, we have had deeper conversations because we're able to text about it
Yeah.
than we would have if we had those conversations face to face or if I tried.
Yeah.
So in some relationships, I think it can actually deepen the relationship by having access to things like texting or email.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. Yeah, I don't know if that's generational or applies to everybody.
Yeah, well, it speaks to the way in which modes of communication can open up, right? That if someone may not be comfortable in one mode of communication, but they might be in another, and how does that actually, right? Yeah. We're going to keep moving because I want us to stay on track. So Christian faith has a belief dimension. It's got a relationship dimension. And then I say here, it's got a mystery dimension. And I'm just going to be real honest, this is the hardest one to talk about. Because this one's very pastoral. There is a dimension of Christian faith where we have to recognize we come up against the limits of what it means to be a creature, right? What it means to be a creature who worships and desires a relationship with the Creator, and recognizing the limits of that. And so I say up here on the screen that faith contains a place of necessary silence and hiddenness that accepts our own finitudes and the limits of that finitude, and recognize that we are not God, and at the end of the day, God is beyond our ability to control, right? And that if you find yourself in a position where it does seem like you're controlling God, you probably are not actually in a relationship with the God revealed in Jesus Christ. You're probably doing something else, right? And this is a hard one to talk about, particularly in our tradition, because we don't like this idea of mystery. And having to reconcile what we believe about God and the relationship we have with God with sometimes the things we experience in this life. Why did this happen? Why would God let this happen? And a lot of times we have to say, well, nothing really is what you have to say. But there is a dimension of this, right? And at the end of the day, it may actually be a really, really good thing, because this is how we know that God is not just a figment of our imagination or a projection of our own best wishes for life in the world, right? This is how we actually know that God is real outside of my own mind, which is actually a very, very good thing. But this is the hard piece of it. In the same way that my wife and I have been married for 14 years. A lot of you have been married way longer than that. But I'm willing to bet, even if you have been married for 50 years or 60 years, you and your spouse are different people. which means there will always be an element of mystery to them because they are not you. They are different, right? And they have an existence kind of their own. Well, in the same way, I think so it is true with Christian faith, that there will always be an element of mystery in our relationship with God. And the challenge of forming this dimension of Christian faith is not to make it go away, but to ask ourselves how we are able to hold it and to recognize it and provide opportunities to acknowledge the heart of that mystery and to be okay with it. This is where sharing experiences with one another can be helpful, right? As we hear from people who are ahead of us in the faith and think about how they have maintained that mystery. Now, I could say here, this is one of the challenges of the world we find ourselves in, is it's so data-driven, right? And it's so driven towards explanation that we want to resist the mystery impulse with every fiber of our being, and so we get things like conspiracy theories, right? We get all of that kind of stuff. But there may also be a way in which the connectivity of our digital age could open us up to others who are also experiencing that mystery such that we can hold it a little bit better and a little bit more faithfully. We're going to keep moving because we're right at time. Last thing I'll say here is that so faith has a belief dimension, a relationship dimension, a mystery dimension, and it has a commitment dimension. Where at the end of the day, Christian faith, my relationship of love and trust in the God revealed in Jesus Christ, actually has to issue forth in concrete actions. With the way I actually live my life in the office or in my relationships. It would be a weird thing to say, I love my wife, but I don't think about her at all. I don't perform any displays of affection or concern. I don't factor her into decision making or anything. That would be a weird thing to say, right? That if at some point, if I say I have a loving relationship with my wife, you should be able to look at my life and see that displayed in, well, the way I live. The very, very fancy word for that is orthopraxy, right? If you have right beliefs about God and right actions about God. And so Christian faith has this right action commitment that grows from our understanding of who God is and the story of God that we find ourselves in. And so I'll end with one last question is, how are we helping communities understand their identity in ways that actually lead them to express their faith in concrete action? One of the challenges of the world in which we find ourselves is that it's very, very easy to say we value things and to let the saying we value thing kind of be the end of our expressions of how we value the thing, right? And so then the challenge becomes, how do we actually help people do things out of their faith? And how do we help people see how their faith informs the way they live every day of their lives? Which can also be one of the incredible opportunities, right? Because now there's more awareness of ways to express faith than there have ever been before in so many ways, right? There's organizations and being connected things that if you have a passion and if you feel God calling you to articulate your Christian faith in this way, there is an avenue for that. Whereas before, 30 years ago, it may have been, I have no idea how I'm supposed to use this gift for the service of the kingdom of God. Well, that ain't a problem now. Right? And so this is also one of the wonderful opportunities. Thank you all so much. We are right at time. I've ended a minute early, so remember that. Thank you all so much.